Conflicts, disagreements, debates, and full-on outrageous arguments. They happen around us all the time. In fact, I won't show a show of hands, but how many of you had a morning that looked or felt a little something like this? Now, this may just be an exaggeration, but disagreements and verbal conflicts are part of life. People see things from different perspectives. They always have, and they always will. No area in life is exempt from conflict. This is true in our homes as siblings bicker over who gets the front seat, what video game to play, or even whose turn it is to wash the dishes. It happens between parents and children over, well, almost everything. Within schools, classmates squabble about the rules of a game or where to sit at lunch. Students and teachers often disagree about homework or disciplinary issues. It transpires in the workplace with coworkers not getting along or employees and bosses not seeing eye to eye. Also with dissatisfied customers and clients who voice their concerns. Even in churches and Christian schools, there are conflicts surrounding theological issues, as well as normal life stuff that Christians deal with, just like everyone else. Then we see it on a large scale in the news media, particularly with politics, the law, social issues, and this year, viruses, vaccines, and masks. The list of scenarios where disagreements can happen seems never ending. I believe that few would argue that last year, 2020, could be described as the year of conflict. On a national and international level, there were disputes about some very high-profile topics: the presidential debates, the social and racial unrest. The coronavirus opened up all sorts of queries, most of which are still raging today, about lockdowns, whose fault it is, and even whether it even is real. We are immersed in a world of conflict for the last year. Let's think about what these arguments and debates have looked like. Presidential elections are almost impossible to watch, as candidates just talk over each other the whole time, seemingly trying to be the loudest voice rather than engaging in detailed, rational discussion on key topics. Media outlets, rather than reporting news, take shots at opposing media outlets. They invite interviewees to talk over them rather than listening. Social tensions have turned violent. The coronavirus pandemic has been very divisive in our nation as people continue to fight about masks, vaccines. So entrenched in their own point of view, they are in many cases unwilling to listen to any other stance. In so many of these situations, as well as those close to home, there are some common characteristics of conflicts gone bad. Discussions are emotional, not rational. Winning is more important than understanding. People get defensive rather than staying humble enough to consider another point of view. Maybe worst of all, some are so fixed to their own perspective and feelings, they won't even converse anymore. They are dedicated to being immovable. Robert Frost once said, "Education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or self-confidence." While Aristotle said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." So as we dive into this idea of conflict at school, then we should be seeking ways to educate ourselves on how to do this better. So many aren't even willing to entertain thoughts and perspectives of others, possibly out of stubborn commitment to their own point of view, but maybe even out of fear that the other perspective may have some validity and they don't want to risk being convinced. Needless to say, conflict, particularly verbal conflict, is part of life. There's no avoiding it. The Bible does give some insight into handling some conflicts and quarrels. 2 Timothy chapter 2 says, "But avoid foolish and ignorant disputes, knowing that they generate strife. And a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient." Romans 12 says, if it is possible, as much depends on you, live peaceably with all men. It sounds like God is giving us counsel that some arguments simply aren't worth having. We need to avoid conversations that we know will lead into foolish and ignorant disputes. I am sure we can all think of certain topics with certain people that we know will blow up and turn into ridiculous arguments that don't benefit either person. Romans 14 says, "Therefore let us pursue things which make for peace, and the things by which one may edify another." So as we choose which conversations to join in, we should be seeking ways to edify, build up, and encourage each other, pursuing peace. Proverbs 26 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." So we should avoid situations where a fool wants to lure us into foolish arguments so that he or she can feel wise. Speaking of fools, Proverbs 29 says, "A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back." Again, God advises us that, in fact, often it is best to keep your mouth shut, to not feel the compulsion to say everything you think. But it also seems that avoiding all conversations simply because they could lead into a disagreement isn't all good. Proverbs 18, "A man who isolates himself, seeking his own desire, he rages against all wise judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart." Involving ourselves with people about topics worthy of discussion is necessary to gain understanding. We can't avoid all disagreements, but how do we engage with those whom we disagree in a way that is peaceful and edifying to both parties? How do we pursue understanding without getting angry and venting all our feelings? Let's take a look at some key ideas that are worth remembering as we engage in conversations, all conversations, but especially in those in which we disagree with someone. When speaking, speak with purpose, especially when the topic leads into an emotional argument. Be careful how you word things. Be wise about when to not to talk, and say things clearly and intentionally. Listen more than you speak. Really listen. Actively listen. And make it evident by your body language that you are not only listening, but processing the other's ideas. As Mr. Harry says, listening is loving. And speaking of love, the foremost thing to remember is that bridge of a relationship is always more crucial than the win. Love is the most important thing. Jesus made that very clear. No matter what, the end goal should always be to love the other person with that active, selfless kind of love that is willing to give up the win for the sake of the relationship. If you take anything away from the speech, I want it to be how to make a valuable outlet to express solutions, reacting to different perspectives with understanding, and to love those who may oppose you. Remember, the only way to make it in this life is together.
Connor, in 10 words or less, what's your takeaway?
I should bring in patience to my conversations.
Okay, I have a balance question on the balance one. So, you talked about the people who are dedicated to being immovable, or like they don't even want to talk to people about stuff because they have it already decided. And that kind of reminded me of Proverbs 18, isolating themselves, the person who isolates himself. How do you balance that with like not doing that, with also still keeping the kind of that instruction of the Bible to avoid foolish arguments? Like what stood out? I know there's a lot of ways, but what do you think stood out to you out of all that?
How to keep that balance? Well, it's really about situational. Like, you have to scale things in your head, like, where is this going? Is this leading into something that's not going to work? How can I fix this situation if it's going to be? Or if this is just something I got to get out of. And it's always a good thing to entertain others' thoughts, think of them in your head really thoroughly, and just process it. You don't have to accept that point of view, you just have to understand it.
Right on.
Very good. I have no questions at this time.
Like a choose your battles.